Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. It is a Thursday morning, and I'm hoping it's going to be a great Thursday here in Sweet TNT, of course. And with me, I have in studio Dr. Maria Clapperton, because guess what? The Ministry of Health is actually acknowledging World Salt Awareness Week by asking us to shake the habit and not use too much salt in our daily diet. So with me, I have Dr. Maria Clapperton, who is a family physician and also the CEO and medical director of the Monte Vista Medical. And she's going to be telling us how we can reduce some of that salt and sodium intake in our diet. Dr. Clapperton, thanks so much for joining us on the Now Morning Show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Kimberly.
Now, let's jump right in. What are some of the risks of, a high salt consumption?
Well, the main thing would be the increased risk of chronic non-communicable diseases, particularly hypertension, which can lead to, increased risk of cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks and strokes. And if it's one thing we've seen with the pandemic is that persons with non-communicable diseases, or as we've been saying all the time, comorbidities have been at greater risk for more severe illness. And in our population, that's the other, health issue that we have a challenge with, would be, lots of persons who have diabetes, hypertension, and the ongoing sequelae of these would be hospitalizations due to strokes and heart attacks, right? Wow. So we really need to make an effort to address this problem, and it's a small start. It has big impact. It may seem harmless, but it's a small change, and it can work wonders to prevent your risk of hypertension and reduce your risk of hospitalization, right? WHO and PAHO, this is World Salt Awareness Week, so March 14th to the 20th is World Salt Awareness Week, and we're really trying to get the word out there to have persons cut back on their salt intake, and I believe the theme is let's shake the habits.
Shake the habits.
Let's shake the habits. Right?
Now, as you mentioned, people cutting back on salt. What is the recommended dose, and is it a recommended dose per day? Is it a recommended dose based on your diet? How do you measure what exactly you should have?
Well, ideally, the daily recommended intake is about 2,300 milligrams, which on average would be about 1 teaspoon of salt. And that would be your sodium intake. But recommended, you should try to keep it to less than 2 grams, right, per day.
Okay.
Right? What really happens in theory, figures from 2015 globally show that the average individual takes in about 8.5 milligrams to 15 grams per day. So we are really aiming to get to that less than 2 gram per day intake to maintain our health. So on average, we're way above where we need to be. And I know the WHO has set targets, global targets, and the aim ideally is to get countries to lower the intake by 30% by 2025. There have been challenges with the pandemic, but let's move forward and get the word out there that we need to cut back on salt.
Right. Now, Dr. Clapperton, is there a different recommended daily dose for an adult versus a child?
Everything in moderation. We really don't want to have too much of any good thing. Generally, we say less than 2 grams, and for kids, we really want to not add a lot of extra preservatives and flavoring. So we want to keep their diet as healthy as possible. So fresh is best, fresh fruits and vegetables, okay? Less salt is always best.
Right. Now, is it true that we can get our required salt intake from certain foods, and what some of those foods might be?
So when we talk about salt, right, we're talking about the sodium content, right? What comes in very handy would be being aware of reading your food labels. And yes, naturally, it's acquired in even your vegetables, right, will have a sodium content. Small amounts in comparison to other foods, but everything you take in will have a certain amount of sodium in it, right? So some foods will more so than others. And especially if you're looking to purchase your items in the grocery, you would want to be mindful of turning to the back of the package and looking at the sodium content and getting familiar with your food labels.
Right. Now, I know we have a lot of leafy greens in TNT. We have a lot of provisions. So is it that...
But do we eat them?
Right. Well, I do. And I'm wondering, sometimes I boil the provisions and I put salt in it. Is that recommended, or should I stay away from the salt because it might have a certain amount amount of sodium content in these leafy greens and stuff?
Right. So what we would like to aim for would be to cut down on your extra addition at the table or extra addition of salt to your pot when you're cooking, right? So what we would try to promote would be try to enjoy the natural flavors of your food, okay? So when you're boiling your provisions, they, again, would naturally have a certain amount of sodium. And 2,000 milligrams per day, it's very easy to reach to that number, right? And that is your total intake for the day. So anytime you go and add extra, and your foods would naturally have, you are actually putting in more and more. So you can probably reach or surpass that in one meal if you're not careful, right? One dish that you're cooking. So it's easier to keep track of it by not trying your best not to add the extra salt, right? So that will bring us to some of the tips. So try to go with natural flavorings and appreciate the natural flavor of your food. Appreciate your food, right, for what it is, and get familiar with those flavors before trying to add salt at the table. Yeah.
Yeah. But Dr. Clapperton, easier said than done, right? We love tasty food here in the Caribbean.
True.
I mean, are there any alternatives to salt? Like, would you recommend anything else we could probably use rather than putting salt, at the dinner table? Anything else we can use to add a little bit more flavor?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, in the Caribbean, we're also very good with our seasonings, right? Herbs and spices, yes. But in the Caribbean, we have our green seasoning that we would use. So to get around it, instead of artificial seasoning powders and adding your salt at the table, we would recommend, using your natural things like, garlic and all your herbs and spices to add that flavor, to get that extra flavor in your cooking, rather than trying to infuse with the salt. Use some garlic, use some ginger, use some bay leaf. We use these things naturally. Let's use a little more and try to put the salt aside. Now that we are more aware and mindful that it does have an impact on our blood pressures, save your life, put the salt aside.
Now, Dr. Clapperton, I have been reading some of these foodie blogs, right?
Yeah.
And they have been touting Himalayan salt and pink salt as the way to go. Is that a myth?
To level with you, if you compare the sodium content of all of these salts, you have table salt, which is iodized, you have your sea salt, and the pink Himalayan salt. The pink Himalayan salt, it gets its color from the extra mineral content that it has. So yes, you'd get a little extra minerals in it. It's not a processed salt like table salt, but it still has a sodium content. So across the board, all of them will have its sodium content. The pink Himalayan salt, in comparison to the table salt, has 1/3 less in terms of sodium content from your table salt, but nevertheless, it will get you there. It all adds up, right? So I would say there's no particularly good salt. All salt is salt, right? So it's still the recommended amount. It's the same across the board. Your sodium intake aim for less than 2 grams. That's 1 teaspoon for the day, and so we talk about starting low and going slow, right? So we don't expect you, as you mentioned, to get rid of it one time. Okay, because this is where we're looking at behavior change. Non-communicable diseases are lifestyle diseases. Trinidadians like food, and it can be detrimental to our health. And it will take a while, since it's what we've been eating all our lives, especially for the elderly members of our population. So it takes a little while to break these habits. So start low, go slow. Cut down. If you have to add salt at the table, if you had to add salt when you're cooking, aim for just a quarter teaspoon, just a little bit at a time, until you can eventually get to the stage where you put away the salt from the table altogether and it's no longer there. You're not going to miss it. It's an acquired taste. Your taste buds have to get accustomed to it. So with time, you will readjust, and even the foods that you were accustomed to will start to taste salty if you go back to them.
I mean, I'm hearing you saying that we can begin to make a change, but I mean, how possible is it to make this change on a budget? Because I think one of the things that we grapple with locally is that sometimes it may seem a bit more expensive to eat unhealthy. I mean, sorry, to eat healthy, right?
Yeah.
So how do we balance, you know, having a budget and also having a healthy lifestyle?
It's true. I mean, I hear patients complain a lot, Doc, I can't afford to eat healthy, but it takes a little creativity, right? So a simple thing like we mentioned, I mean, salt is cheap, but to make a change that has big impact on your health overall would be to cut back on your usage of salt, right? We're talking about incorporating more fruits and vegetables, which can be costly, but there's a difference if you purchase your fruits and vegetables from the supermarket as opposed to going to the market itself. It takes a little more effort to wake up early and go to the market to shop, but these things will help. It takes a little more effort to plant your own kitchen garden at home, but again, it would be affordable, and you know that's really where we want to focus. Your diet. So increase your intake of fresh fruits and vegetables, and again, we listed previous options that you can choose. So you can go to the market, or you can plant your own kitchen garden to have, you know, your fruits and vegetables readily at hand. I mean, everybody could plant a little chive in the backyard, you know, so your herbs would be readily on hand to flavor your food as well.
Right.
You know, in terms of proteins, I mean, you have peas and beans that are more affordable. There's fish, fresh fish. You know, and we also advise to cut down on your canned processed foods because the preservatives would have a high sodium content, more so than if you were to get the meat fresh, right?
Yeah. So in addition to looking at the labels, we also should kind of stay away, or at least use in moderation, those processed and packaged foods.
In moderation, yes, everything in moderation, that's very important. Try to stay away from it though, you know. Canned food is cheap in comparison, but you know, try to make the sacrifice and go for, I mean, we're talking about at least fish. You don't have to buy a whole, you know, it's not ribs and pork and all of these things are red meat. You don't want to cut down on it anyway because it's not good for your health. So try fresh is best, you know?
Yeah.
So eat fresh.
And Dr. Clapperton, I mean, I know we mentioned hypertension, but any other symptoms or any other things that, you know, salt can cause? So, for example, does it have a connection to diabetes? Does it have a connection to our kidneys or kidney failure? So anything like that we should look out for?
Well, starting simple to promote cutting back on the salt intake has big impact in terms of impacting on our blood pressure readings. And what we notice a lot of the times is a lot of patients who have high blood pressure also have diabetes hand in hand, you know, and I would say more or less because they're lifestyle diseases, and it has a lot to do with how you eat, how much you move, how you live, what your habits are like. So you tend to have them coming hand in hand like that, in that way, you know, and these things are preventable. Once you know your numbers, check your blood pressures, know what your readings are. It's a silent killer. You're not going to, it's a myth. You're not going to know when your pressure is high by feeling a certain way. Get your blood pressure checked, know your numbers in advance. Most of the times when you start to feel a certain way, it's when your blood pressures are too high or dangerously high, or may have been so for a very long period of time. And again, there are, you know, sequelae of an uncontrolled blood pressure and uncontrolled blood sugar, and as you mentioned, on your kidney, your end organ, so end organ damage, right? It damages your eyesight, it can damage, you know, cardiovascular system, so heart attacks and strokes, and renal failure. Right?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Clapperton, for joining us. And of course, remember, the Ministry of Health is trying as much as it can to shake the habit and to help us reduce our salt intake for a better diet. So thank you so much, Dr. Clapperton, for coming and sharing that information with us. Now, you are on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a quick break, but remember, we are opening our phone lines in the next few minutes. So stay with us. We are going to be talking about the Cabinet reshuffle. You're on the Now Morning Show. We will be right back.